3 police cars surrounded me while I was hammering in a single wooden post. The reason? Destroying property values. The caller? Dana Ellison, a self-appointed HOA president wearing clearance Walmart clothes with a fake Louis Vuitton bag. But she had no idea that the clubhouse where she held her weekly HOA meetings sat on my land. And this story will end with her standing outside that same clubhouse, staring at the private property signs I just posted. Trust me, the ending will be epic. All I wanted was to fix up my grandfather's old cabin. She turned it into a ridiculous neighborhood war. A war full of fake lawyers, emergency meetings, police reports, and some truly terrible PowerPoint slides. Tell me in the comments, what's the craziest HOA drama you have ever seen? It started on a perfect Saturday morning in late May. I was finally beginning the expansion project on my grandfather's 1952 cabin here at Pine Lake, Minnesota. The cabin had been sitting mostly untouched since Franklin Cole passed away a year ago, and my wife Sarah and I had been planning this renovation for months. Our 8-year-old daughter Lily was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement about having a bigger space for summer vacation. The morning air was crisp, the lake was like glass, and I was feeling pretty good about life as I measured out the foundation for what would become a small workshop addition. I'd done everything by the book: city permits, building inspections, environmental clearances. This wasn't some amateur weekend warrior project. I'm a restoration specialist who works on historic cabins and properties, so I know the drill. I'd even hired a proper surveyor to make sure everything was perfectly positioned according to the original property lines. The first wooden support post was going in exactly where it needed to be, and I was taking my time to get it right. The satisfying thunk of the hammer against wood echoed across the quiet lake as I worked. That's when the storm arrived in the form of Dana Ellison. She came marching across the small beach that separated our properties, clipboard in hand, wearing what looked like a discount business suit that had seen better days. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she had this expression on her face like she'd just caught someone stealing from her purse. "Stop right there," she shouted from about 20 feet away. "You are in direct violation of Homeowners Association regulations. No construction is permitted without proper HOA approval." I paused mid-swing and looked at her like she'd just told me the earth was flat. "Ma'am, this is my property, and I have all the necessary city permits," I replied calmly, setting down my hammer. "The HOA doesn't have authority over private property improvements that meet municipal codes." Dana's face turned a shade of red that probably wasn't healthy. She waved her clipboard like it was some kind of magic wand. "The Pine Lake Homeowners Association has final authority over all construction activities that could impact community property values. You will cease this unauthorized activity immediately or face serious legal consequences." I glanced around at the peaceful lake, the handful of modest cabins dotting the shoreline, and the small community clubhouse about 100 yards away where the HOA apparently held their meetings. The whole situation felt surreal. "Look, Mrs. Ellison, I appreciate your concern for the community, but this is a simple cabin expansion. My grandfather built the original structure in 1952, and I'm just adding a small workshop. Everything is legal and properly permitted." What happened next still makes me shake my head. Instead of discussing this like reasonable adults, Dana pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report a property destruction emergency," she said loudly enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "We have a man who is refusing to stop unauthorized construction that's damaging community property values. He's being aggressive and won't comply with official Homeowners Association directive." I stood there with my mouth open, still holding my hammer, wondering if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate universe where hammering a post into your own property was a criminal offense. Within 15 minutes, 3 police cruisers came rolling down the narrow lake road with their lights flashing. I watched in disbelief as neighbors started coming out of their cabins to see what was happening. My wife Sarah pulled into our driveway just as the first officer was getting out of his car, and I could see the panic on her face as she spotted the police cars surrounding her husband. Our daughter Lily immediately hid behind her mom, clearly scared by all the commotion. The lead officer, a middle-aged guy with graying hair and tired eyes, walked over to where I was standing. "Sir, we received a report of unauthorized construction and possible property damage. Can you tell me what's going on here?" Sheriff Bradley, that's what his name tag said, was clearly skeptical from the moment he arrived. I explained the situation calmly, showed him my permits, and pointed out the single wooden post that had apparently triggered this whole circus. He examined the paperwork, looked at the minimal work I'd done, and then turned to Dana with an expression that suggested he'd dealt with this kind of thing before. "Ma'am, all of this gentleman's permits appear to be in order. This seems like a civil matter between neighbors, not a criminal issue." Dana wasn't having it. She launched into a dramatic speech about community standards and property values, waving her clipboard around like she was conducting an orchestra. The other officers looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. After about 30 minutes of Dana insisting that I was somehow destroying the entire neighborhood with my single wooden post, the police finally started packing up to leave. Sheriff Bradley gave me his card and said quietly, "Sir, you might want to document any future interactions with this neighbor. Sometimes these HOA disputes can get complicated." As the police cars pulled away, Dana delivered her parting shot with the dramatic flair of a soap opera villain. "This isn't over, Mr. Cole. The Pine Lake Homeowners Association will not tolerate this expansion of yours. You have no idea what you've started here, and that clubhouse over there, we'll see who really owns what around here." As she stormed off, my neighbor Hank Carter walked over from his cabin next door. Hank was a weathered guy in his 50s who'd known my grandfather for decades. He looked at the retreating form of Dana, then at me, and shook his head with a knowing smile. "Son, your granddad Franklin owned a lot more around here than most folks realize," he said quietly. "If that woman wants to play games about property ownership, she might want to be real careful about which stones she starts turning over, especially when it comes to that clubhouse she's so proud of." I stared across the water at the modest building where the HOA held their meetings, then back at the single wooden post that had caused all this drama. Something told me this was just the beginning. The letter looked official, thick paper, embossed letterhead reading, Law Offices of Ellison and Associates. But one thing stood out. The law firm was registered to a house with Christmas lights still up in June. The tension in our household was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah was pacing around our cabin's small kitchen the next morning, coffee mug clutched in her hands like a lifeline. "Nathan, this is escalating way too fast," she said. "Maybe we should just talk to this Dana woman and find some compromise?" I was sitting at our kitchen table, staring at the lake through the window, where I could see the clubhouse in the distance. Our daughter Lily was in the corner with her coloring books, drawing what appeared to be stick figures of angry people. The whole situation was starting to affect our family, and that made me angrier than any false police report ever could. When I called my college friend Rachel Reed, a property lawyer in Minneapolis, and read the cease and desist letter over the phone, she started laughing. "Nathan, this is amateur hour. Half of these legal citations don't even exist. I looked up Ellison and Associates while you were reading. It's registered to a residential address where some guy named Steve lives with his mom. Dana's brother-in-law, I'm guessing?" The relief I felt was immediate, but it was quickly replaced by anger at being intimidated by such obvious fakery. Rachel agreed to drive up that weekend to help me figure out what Dana was really up to, and more importantly, to examine my grandfather's property records that I'd never bothered to review carefully. I decided to install security cameras around my property, which turned out to be a smart move because Dana had apparently decided to make harassing me her full-time job. Every morning she would patrol the property line with a measuring tape and clipboard, taking photos and muttering to herself. On Tuesday, she brought along Steve, a nervous man wearing socks with sandals who filmed my wooden post while announcing they were building an ironclad case. I calmly filmed them right back. "Great idea, I'm documenting harassment." Dana's face turned purple, but they retreated to what I assumed was Steve's mom's house to plan their next move. Dana called an emergency community meeting for Thursday evening at the clubhouse. When Sarah and I arrived, we found about 15 residents sitting in folding chairs, while Dana presented her PowerPoint about property values under siege. The presentation was something to behold. She'd taken photos of my single wooden post and labeled it Danger to Community Standards. The community was clearly divided. Hank Carter stood up and said, "Dana, the man is just fixing up his family cabin. Franklin built that place back in 1952. Dana's response was swift and vicious. "Hank, you're obviously biased because you want the construction work. This is a clear conflict of interest." Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who'd lived here for decades, tried to calm things down. "Dana, dear, I remember when Franklin built that cabin. He was always respectful." Dana snapped back. "The past is irrelevant. We have standards now." Meanwhile, Rachel had been doing research that would prove crucial. The Pine Lake Homeowners Association had serious problems with its incorporation documents from 1998. Several key signatures were missing. The clubhouse had been built without proper permits, and the financial records showed monthly payments going to Dana from something called Hutchinson Development Company. "Nathan, your HOA president might not be as legitimate as she pretends," Rachel told me over dinner at our cabin. "And those consulting fees, they're coming from a development company that's been buying up lakefront properties. Someone's planning something big for this area." Dana's final ultimatum arrived Friday morning. Another dramatic letter demanding I remove all unauthorized structures or face emergency injunction proceedings and legal action seeking monetary damages. Sarah read it and looked at me with worried eyes. Just give her what she wants, Nathan. Is this really worth all this stress? But something about the whole situation bothered me beyond just the harassment. Why was Dana so determined to stop such a minor project? What was she really afraid of? The pieces weren't adding up, and I had a feeling that understanding Dana's real motives was the key to ending this nightmare. That evening, as I sat on my grandfather's old dock watching the sunset, I couldn't shake Hank's words about Franklin owning more property than people realized. I'd inherited the cabin and what I thought was just the immediate lot, but I'd never examined all the old paperwork carefully. Most of it was stored in boxes in the cabin's attic, yellowed documents from decades ago that I'd figured weren't important anymore. Maybe it was time to take a closer look at exactly what my grandfather had left me, especially since Dana seemed so concerned about property boundaries and community control. Rachel called me that evening with urgency in her voice that I'd never heard before. Nathan, I've been going through public records, and I found something in your grandfather's old property deed that changes everything. I can't discuss this over the phone, it's too important. Can you meet me at the county courthouse first thing Monday morning? And Nathan, you're going to want to sit down when I show you what I found. The way she said it sent a chill down my spine, but also sparked something that felt a lot like hope. Maybe Dana had picked the wrong person to mess with, and maybe my grandfather had left me more than just a cabin and some beautiful memories. Whatever Rachel had discovered was about to turn this entire conflict upside down. Rachel was waiting for me in the county courthouse records office with a stack of documents and an expression I couldn't quite read. She'd driven up early from Minneapolis and had been there since the building opened, pulling property records and old surveyor maps. Nathan, before I show you this, I want you to understand that what I'm about to tell you changes everything, she said quietly. Your grandfather, Franklin, wasn't just a cabin owner here at Pine Lake. He was one of the original property developers for this entire area. She spread out a large 1952 surveyor map on the table between us, and I could see property lines drawn in faded ink across what was now our community. The original boundaries showed my grandfather's property extending far beyond what I'd always assumed was our lot. According to the map, Franklin had purchased multiple parcels when he built the cabin, including a significant piece of lakefront that extended all the way to where the community clubhouse now stood. Rachel pointed to the deed from 1952, and there it was, in black and white. Franklin Cole owned the land where Dana held her precious HOA. But wait, I said, trying to process what I was seeing. The clubhouse was built in 1998. Surely the land was transferred to the community when they formed the HOA, right? That's when Rachel showed me the real bombshell. The 1998 transfer documents that supposedly gave the clubhouse land to the newly formed homeowners association were incomplete. Franklin's signature was missing from the key transfer papers, and there was no record of any payment or legal consideration for the land. Nathan, as far as I can tell from these records, your grandfather never actually transferred ownership of that land. When you inherited this property, you inherited all of it, including the land under their clubhouse. I stared at the documents, my hands actually shaking as the implications hit me. Dana had been threatening me over property rights while holding her meetings on land that I apparently owned. I decided to take immediate action. That very afternoon, while Dana was conducting another one of her emergency HOA meetings at the clubhouse, I drove over with a surveyor friend of mine and Rachel. We walked into the meeting right in the middle of Dana's dramatic presentation about stopping the destruction of our community values. 20-some residents turned to stare as I approached the front of the room with an armload of official documents. "Excuse me," I said calmly, "but I think you're all trespassing on my property." The room went dead silent and Dana's face went through about 5 different shades of red before settling on purple. I unfolded the surveyor map on the table in front of everyone and pointed to the property boundaries clearly marked in the original 1952 survey. This clubhouse sits on land that my grandfather Franklin Cole purchased 70 years ago. According to county records, ownership of this land was never legally transferred to any homeowners association. I showed them Franklin's original deed, the incomplete transfer documents from 1998, and the current property tax records that listed me as the legal owner. Dana was sputtering, trying to interrupt, but the other residents were staring at the documents with growing understanding of what this meant. "That's impossible," Dana finally managed to scream. "This is community property. I'm the president of this homeowners association and we've been meeting here for decades." Rachel stepped forward with her lawyer voice in full effect. Mrs. Ellison, being president of an organization doesn't grant you ownership rights to property, and if this association has been using private property without permission for 25 years, that's actually a legal issue you might want to address. The room erupted in confused conversations as neighbors tried to understand what was happening to their community center. The next morning, I arrived at the clubhouse with a professional surveyor team and started planting official boundary stakes around the property that actually belonged to me. Dana came running out of her nearby rental apartment in her bathrobe, screaming like I was stealing her firstborn child. "You can't do this! This is our clubhouse! The community needs this space!" I stayed calm and professional. "Actually, Mrs. Ellison, I can do this. This is my land, and I have every legal right to mark my property boundaries." The surveyor confirmed that the clubhouse sat entirely within the boundaries of my inherited property, with about 10 feet to spare on all sides. Word spread through the community like wildfire. By noon, I had neighbors stopping by to ask if it was true that I owned the clubhouse. Some were angry, some were confused, and a few seemed relieved that Dana's authority might finally be challenged. That's when a new player entered the game, a smooth-talking guy named Brad Hutchinson, who showed up at my door introducing himself as a community mediator who might be able to help resolve this property dispute. Something about Brad immediately set off my alarm bells. He was too polished, too interested in buying my property, and way too eager to offer me what he called generous above-market compensation for your entire property portfolio. When I asked who had told him I was interested in selling anything, he got nervous and started talking about community channels and word getting around. Dana's response to losing control was predictable but extreme. She filed a harassment complaint with the sheriff's department, claiming I was stalking her and making threatening gestures whenever I was near the clubhouse. She showed the deputies photos she'd taken of me checking my own property lines and presented them as evidence of intimidation. Sheriff Bradley came by to investigate, and I could tell he was getting tired of being called out for what were clearly civil disputes between neighbors. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Ellison claims you've been threatening her and trying to intimidate her away from the clubhouse," he said wearily. "I'm required to investigate these complaints, but I have to say, checking your own property lines doesn't constitute criminal behavior." Rachel's deeper investigation into the community's financial records revealed the real motive behind Dana's panic. The Pine Lake HOA had been receiving monthly consulting fees from something called Hutchinson Development Company, the same company that employed the mysteriously helpful Brad who'd shown up, offering to buy my property. Public records showed that Brad's company had been quietly purchasing lakefront properties throughout the area for the past 2 years, apparently planning some kind of major development project. Dana had been receiving $500 per month to help facilitate property acquisitions, which explained why she was so desperate to maintain her authority over the community. The stress was taking a toll on my family. Sarah was barely speaking to me, convinced that I was choosing this fight over our marriage and our daughter's peace of mind. Lily had started having nightmares about police cars and angry people yelling at her daddy. I spent sleepless nights pacing around the cabin, staring across the lake at the clubhouse that I apparently owned, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I should just let Dana have her little kingdom and focus on my family. But every time I considered backing down, I thought about my grandfather Franklin and what he would have wanted for this land. That's when Hank Carter showed up at my door with a weathered cardboard box. "Your granddad left this with me before he passed," Hank said quietly. "Told me to give it to you if anyone ever tried to mess with the property or the clubhouse. He said if that day ever came, you'd find everything you needed in here to set things right." Inside the box were Franklin's personal papers, including a leather-bound journal with an entry that made my blood run cold. "If anyone tries to take this land or use it for something other than community good, show them what's buried under the clubhouse foundation. The truth about this place needs to be protected." I stared at those words by lamplight, wondering what other secrets my grandfather had left behind. The locks had changed. Dana didn't know it yet, but this Monday would end with tears and mascara running down her cheeks in front of half the neighborhood. Monday morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I drove to the hardware store, bought the biggest private property no trespassing signs they had, and posted them all around the clubhouse property that I now knew belonged to me. When Dana arrived for her scheduled community inspection, she found herself locked out of the building she'd been treating as her personal kingdom. The sight of her pounding on the clubhouse doors while neighbors watched from their windows was both satisfying and pathetic. A woman who'd built her entire identity around controlling a building that never belonged to her. By Tuesday, the local news had picked up the story. Clubhouse ownership dispute rocks Pine Lake community was the headline, and a TV crew showed up to interview residents. Dana refused to talk to reporters, hiding behind her curtains whenever the news van appeared. The few neighbors willing to go on camera revealed how divided our community had become. "I think Nathan has every right to use his own property," said Tom Miller. "But where are we supposed to hold meetings now?" worried Janet Walsh. "Dana's been getting too controlling lately," admitted Bob Harrison, though he wouldn't elaborate on camera. The battle lines were clearly drawn. Dana called another emergency meeting for Thursday evening, but had to hold it in the community park since I'd changed the clubhouse locks. About 30 residents showed up, many standing because there weren't enough picnic tables. Dana stood on a picnic table, looking increasingly frantic. Her usually neat hair was messy, her makeup smudged. "This is an illegal land grab," she declared, voice cracking with emotion. "Mason Cole is trying to steal our community center and destroy everything we've built." When I arrived with Rachel and my documentation, the crowd parted like I was carrying something contagious. I set up a portable projector right there in the park pavilion and gave the community a complete presentation of the property ownership history. The visual evidence was overwhelming. Original 1952 survey maps, incomplete transfer documents, exact property boundaries. As I explained each document methodically, I could see understanding dawn on face after face. Whatever Dana had told them about community ownership simply wasn't supported by the legal facts projected on the screen. Property lines don't lie, and the clubhouse clearly sat on land that belonged to my family. That's when everything exploded. While I was giving my presentation, the State Environmental Protection Agency was raiding Brad Hutchinson's development company offices 3 counties away. Brad was arrested that evening for corruption and bribery, making the late-night news. When Dana saw her secret financial partner being led away in handcuffs on live television, she realized her monthly consulting fees were about to disappear forever. The woman who'd been threatening me with legal action was suddenly facing the possibility that her own questionable financial arrangements might become very public. Friday morning brought Dana's complete breakdown. She showed up at my cabin at 7 a.m. looking like she hadn't slept in days, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "You've destroyed everything," she screamed, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "I've given 5 years of my life to this community and you're stealing it with your lawyers and tricks." I stepped outside and activated my phone to record the interaction, which only made her more hysterical. "Now you're recording me like I'm a criminal. I'm the victim here." Sarah appeared behind me with Lily, both clearly startled by Dana's early morning meltdown. When residents asked Dana direct questions about the money from Brad's company at that evening's gathering, she completely lost what remained of her composure. "Yes, I took consulting fees," she screamed at the assembled neighbors. "Do you know how much this HOA president position pays? Nothing. I've been volunteering for years, and when someone offered to compensate me for my expertise, I took it." Her mascara ran down her cheeks in dark streaks, hands shaking visibly, voice getting higher and more hysterical with every word. The sight was both dramatic and pathetic, as neighbors watched someone they'd known for years completely fall apart in public. But Dana wasn't finished. In a last-ditch attempt to regain control, she filed another police report, claiming I had threatened to destroy her during the community meeting. She showed Sheriff Bradley a cell phone video, but he could see it had been edited to remove context. "Mrs. Ellison, this video has clearly been altered, and frankly, I'm tired of being called out here for civil disputes," he told her bluntly. "Filing false police reports is a crime. You might want to think carefully before making more accusations." The community was now completely split, with families who'd been friends for years suddenly on opposite sides of a property dispute that had spiraled out of control. My family was caught in the middle, with Lily asking why everyone was so angry and Sarah begging me to end the conflict before it destroyed our relationships with half our neighbors. That evening, Hank Carter walked over with another surprise from my grandfather's estate. "Franklin left specific instructions," Hank said, handing me a small brass key that looked decades old. Said if the clubhouse was ever threatened or if anyone tried to take control of the community for wrong reasons, I should give you this and tell you to check the basement foundation. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more key, hidden under my grandfather's cabin floorboards that hadn't been used in 70 years, and it was about to unlock secrets that would change everything Dana thought she knew about Pine Lake. The courthouse in downtown Pine Valley was buzzing with activity on the morning of our hearing. Rachel had filed what she called a property ownership clarification suit, basically asking a judge to officially confirm what the documents already proved about my ownership of the clubhouse land. The local media had gotten wind of the case, and there were reporters with cameras waiting outside the building when I arrived. Dana showed up looking like she'd hired her lawyer from a discount legal service. The guy kept fumbling through papers and seemed nervous about the whole proceeding. I felt confident but also nervous about having our family's private business discussed in open court. In the days leading up to the hearing, Dana had made one last desperate attempt to win public sympathy. She gave an interview to the local newspaper where she painted herself as a victim of legal harassment, claiming that I was using expensive lawyers to bully a volunteer community leader who was just trying to protect neighborhood property values. "I'm just a single woman trying to serve my community," she told the reporter, conveniently leaving out the part about her monthly payments from Brad's development company. "Mr. Cole has unlimited resources and professional legal help, while I'm just trying to represent the interests of ordinary homeowners who could lose their community center." The courtroom was packed with Pine Lake residents who'd come to witness the resolution of our dispute. Judge Martinez was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd clearly dealt with property disputes before. She listened patiently as Rachel presented our evidence: the original 1952 survey maps, Franklin's deed records, and the incomplete transfer documents from when the HOA was formed. The land surveyor testified about the exact boundaries of my inherited property, using a projector to show the court exactly where the clubhouse sat in relation to my legal property lines. Everything was clear, documented, and backed up by 70 years of official records. Dana's lawyer tried to argue that decades of community use had somehow created legal ownership rights for the HOA, but Judge Martinez wasn't buying it. "Counselor, using someone else's property without permission doesn't create ownership rights," she said dryly. "If that were the case, every trespasser would eventually own the land they were trespassing on." When Dana took the stand to testify on her own behalf, things went from bad to worse for her case. Under Rachel's questioning, she admitted to receiving monthly payments from Brad Hutchinson's development company, confessed to exaggerating her complaints to the police, and revealed that she'd never actually verified the HOA's legal ownership of the clubhouse land before claiming authority over it. The most damaging moment came when Rachel asked Dana about her qualifications to serve as HOA president. "Mrs. Ellison, can you tell the court how you were elected to this position?" Dana's face went red as she mumbled something about community consensus and natural leadership. It turned out that Dana had essentially appointed herself as HOA president after the previous coordinator moved away, and there hadn't been an actual election in over 3 years. Judge Martinez looked increasingly annoyed as the details of Dana's self-appointed authority became clear. "Ms. Ellison, you've wasted significant court time and public resources with claims that appear to have no legal foundation whatsoever." The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. I was confirmed as the legal owner of the clubhouse property. Dana's homeowners association was declared to have no legitimate authority over private property, and all of her harassment complaints were dismissed as frivolous. "Mr. Cole, you have every right to control access to your private property," Judge Martinez declared. "Mrs. Ellison, you have no legal standing to prevent lawful use of private property, and your pattern of false complaints to law enforcement is deeply concerning." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as neighbors processed what this meant for their community. Outside the courthouse, I addressed the crowd of worried residents who'd gathered on the steps. Many of them were genuinely concerned about losing their community center, and I wanted to reassure them that I wasn't interested in destroying the neighborhood gathering place that had served them for decades. "I'm not here to hurt this community," I told them. "My grandfather Franklin loved this place, and he wanted it to remain a space where neighbors could come together. I'm prepared to work with all of you to establish fair lease agreements that will keep the clubhouse open for community use while protecting everyone's legal rights." The relief on many faces was visible as they realized their community center wasn't disappearing. That's when Sheriff Bradley stepped forward with an announcement that surprised everyone, including me. "Mrs. Ellison, you're under arrest for filing false police reports and harassment," he said, pulling out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Dana's dramatic collapse into tears and protests of innocence were recorded by every news camera present, and the footage would be played on local television for weeks afterward. As she was led away in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence and claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This woman had made my family's life miserable for months, but seeing her public humiliation was less satisfying than I'd expected it to be. The immediate aftermath of the court ruling brought rapid changes to our community. Residents who'd been afraid to oppose Dana's increasingly arbitrary rules suddenly felt free to voice their opinions about how the neighborhood should be managed. Hank Carter was elected as the new community coordinator in an actual democratic vote, and his first act was to establish reasonable, written guidelines for community activities that respected both property rights and neighbors' needs. My construction permits were immediately reinstated, and I was finally able to continue work on the cabin expansion that had started this whole mess. The transformation in community dynamics was remarkable. Without Dana's constant drama and manufactured crises, neighbors started talking to each other again instead of choosing sides in an endless conflict. Property values actually increased over the following months as word spread that Pine Lake was a community that respected both individual rights and collective cooperation. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story 6 months later titled, "How One Neighborhood Learned to Govern Itself," that painted our resolution as a model for other communities dealing with similar HOA disputes. For my family, the end of the legal battle marked the beginning of a healing process. Sarah had been proud of how I'd handled the situation with integrity, rather than resorting to Dana's tactics of harassment and intimidation. Lily learned valuable lessons about standing up to bullies while still treating people with respect, even when they don't deserve it. Our marriage had actually grown stronger through the stress of the conflict, and we felt more connected to our community than ever before. The cabin expansion was completed that fall, and we hosted the first community barbecue in our new workshop space, bringing together neighbors who'd been divided by months of unnecessary conflict. But the biggest surprise was still waiting for me in that basement safe that my grandfather had left behind. The documents I'd found there revealed that Franklin had been planning something much more significant than just protecting property rights. His vision for Pine Lake involved transforming our small community into something that could serve as a model for environmental conservation and sustainable development throughout the region. The papers in that safe would launch the next chapter of our story, one that would honor Franklin's memory while creating something amazing for future generations to enjoy. 6 months after the court victory, Pine Lake had transformed into something beautiful. My cabin expansion was complete, featuring a workshop space that doubled as a community meeting room when needed. The lake community was thriving under Hank Carter's reasonable leadership, with actual democratic decision-making replacing Dana's arbitrary rule. Property values had increased by 25% as word spread about our successful transition from HOA tyranny to genuine neighbor cooperation. Tourism was picking up as people discovered our peaceful lakefront community, where conflicts were resolved through discussion rather than legal threats. Everyone seemed to be winning, except for the people who'd tried to exploit our neighborhood for personal gain. Dana's fate was exactly what you'd expect for someone who'd built her entire identity around fake authority. She served 8 months of community service for filing false police reports and was banned from Pine Lake property permanently. The last I heard, she was working at a retail store in a town 3 hours away, still telling anyone who'd listen that she'd been wrongfully persecuted by a conspiracy of lawyers and corrupt officials. Her former rental apartment sat empty for months before finally being rented to a nice young couple with kids who actually contribute positively to community life. Sometimes I see her car driving slowly past our neighborhood, but she never stops or gets out. Brad Hutchinson's development company went bankrupt, paying legal fees and environmental fines related to his corruption charges. He ended up serving 2 years in federal prison for bribing county officials and violating environmental protection laws. All of his plans for lakefront condo development were permanently blocked by new conservation protections that the county implemented after his arrest. During a prison interview that made the local news, Brad still insisted that he was the victim of environmental extremists who didn't understand economic development. His cellmate apparently found this hilarious and told reporters that Brad had simply been outplayed by people who knew how to work within the legal system instead of trying to corrupt it. The documents I'd found in Franklin's basement safe revealed the most amazing surprise of all. My grandfather hadn't just been protecting property rights, he'd been protecting a vision for transforming Pine Lake into an environmental education center that could serve the entire region. His detailed plans included converting the clubhouse into a nature learning center, establishing hiking trails throughout the lakefront area, and creating programs that would teach children and adults about lake ecology and sustainable living. Franklin had been decades ahead of his time in understanding how communities could balance economic development with environmental protection. The final twist came when I discovered that Franklin's will contained provisions for donating the entire lakefront area to a conservation trust if his family ever chose to honor his environmental vision rather than pursuing maximum financial gain. I could have claimed the property individually and sold it for millions of dollars to developers, but that would have betrayed everything my grandfather had worked to protect. Instead, I chose to establish the Franklin Cole Nature Preserve, ensuring that Pine Lake would remain a place where families could enjoy nature while learning about environmental stewardship for generations to come. The clubhouse was transformed into an environmental education center that welcomed school groups, family nature programs, and community workshops about sustainable living. My cabin became the headquarters for guided lake tours and conservation programs that attracted visitors from throughout Minnesota and beyond. National magazines featured our community as a model for how neighborhoods could develop economically while protecting natural resources. The irony wasn't lost on me that Dana's attempts to control development had accidentally helped create the exact opposite of what she'd claimed to want: a thriving community that balanced growth with conservation. Sarah and I discovered that surviving this conflict had made our marriage stronger than ever. We'd learned to support each other through stress while maintaining our individual principles, and we'd raised our daughter in an environment where she could see how adults resolve conflicts through integrity rather than manipulation. Lily became a passionate young environmental advocate who loved giving tours to visiting school groups and explaining why protecting lake ecosystems was important for everyone's future. Our family had found a purpose that extended far beyond our own happiness to include service to our broader community. The economic success of our environmental approach proved that conservation and prosperity weren't mutually exclusive. Property values continued rising as Pine Lake became known as a destination for eco-friendly family vacations and corporate retreats focused on sustainability education. Local businesses benefited from the increased tourism, and our community became a case study for how neighborhoods could thrive by protecting their natural resources rather than exploiting them. Even former Dana supporters admitted that the transformation had exceeded their expectations for community improvement. 2 years after the courthouse victory, I received a phone call that would launch the next phase of my life's work. A desperate family in Texas was facing harassment from their HOA over a vegetable garden they'd planted in their front yard, and they'd heard about our successful resistance to HOA tyranny. "Mr. Cole, they're threatening $500 daily fines if we don't remove our tomatoes and peppers," the caller explained. "We've seen the stories about how you defeated your HOA, and we're hoping you might be able to help us." I looked across Pine Lake at the thriving community we'd built and realized that Franklin's legacy was meant to extend far beyond our little corner of Minnesota. Rachel and I started a consulting business specializing in community rights and HOA reform, helping families throughout the country who were facing similar harassment from power-hungry neighborhood associations. Every successful case we handled protected another family from the kind of abuse we'd experienced, and gradually we began building a network of communities that prioritized cooperation over control. The skills I'd learned during our fight with Dana became tools for helping others stand up to bullies while building stronger, more democratic neighborhoods where everyone's rights were respected. Equals. 2 years after our victory at Pine Lake, I was packing consultation materials for Texas when Lily asked, "Daddy, are you going to help those people stop their mean HOA lady?" At 10 years old, she understood that some adults used fake authority to bully neighbors. "That's exactly what I'm going to do," I told her. "Every time we help one family stand up to HOA bullies, we make it easier for the next family." Sarah smiled from the kitchen doorway, proud that our difficult experience had transformed into something that helped others nationwide. The Pine Lake Nature Preserve had become nationally recognized as a model for community-led environmental conservation. Rachel had become my business partner in community rights restoration, and we were getting calls from families facing harassment from corrupt homeowners associations across the country. Each case taught us new strategies for helping ordinary people defend their property rights against institutional bullying, and the success rate was remarkably high once people understood their legal rights and recognized the common patterns these bullies used. The Texas family was facing a situation eerily similar to ours. Their HOA president, Margaret, was threatening massive fines over a front yard vegetable garden that supposedly violated aesthetic guidelines. When I arrived, I immediately recognized the same patterns. An insecure person using manufactured authority to control neighbors who hadn't given permission to be controlled. Margaret showed up at my first meeting, clipboard in hand, announcing, "Sir, you don't understand our community standards. Food production belongs in backyards where it can't be seen." I introduced myself calmly. "Ma'am, I think we need to talk about property rights and community governance." The resolution in Texas took only 3 months compared to our year-long battle. We organized the community, discovered their HOA was never properly incorporated, and helped residents establish democratic processes. The vegetable garden stayed and inspired other families to grow their own food. Margaret eventually moved to a different subdivision, where she presumably found new neighbors to harass, following the pattern we'd seen repeated in case after case across the country. Success stories were accumulating nationwide as Rachel and I helped communities reform their governance structures. We developed a systematic approach combining legal research, community organizing, and media attention to shine light on fake authority harassment. Each victory made the next case easier because word was spreading that HOA bullies could be defeated when communities worked together. We started offering free workshops and publishing guides explaining property rights in simple language, leveling the playing field so bullies couldn't rely on intimidating people with fake legal threats. The environmental education programs at Pine Lake continued attracting national attention. Lily had become our youngest tour guide, explaining lake ecology to visiting school groups with passion that came from growing up understanding environmental protection was both important and achievable. Sarah started teaching workshops for other communities wanting to combine conservation with economic development. Our family had found purpose, extending far beyond our happiness, to include service, honoring Franklin's vision while helping others defend their rights against neighborhood tyrants. Looking back on everything since that first morning when I hammered a wooden post into my own property, I realized Dana's harassment had accidentally launched something much more significant than a property dispute. Her attempts to control our community revealed the importance of understanding legal rights, building genuine democratic processes, and standing up to bullies who use fake authority to exploit neighbors. Franklin's hidden legacy provided the foundation for work now, protecting families across the country from similar abuse. Every time someone called with a new HOA horror story, I thought about that morning when 3 police cars surrounded me for improving my own property. Dana learned that fake authority crumbles when confronted with real law and community support. Brad discovered corruption always has consequences when people shine light on it. And me, I learned that fighting one bully teaches you to recognize and defeat all bullies, while building something positive for future generations. Pine Lake remained protected, beautiful, and free, while the methods we developed continued spreading to help other communities defend their rights. The work continues, because there's always another Margaret or Dana somewhere, threatening families with manufactured authority and fake crises. But now, more people know how to recognize these patterns and respond effectively. Every victory makes the next battle easier, and every community that learns democratic self-governance makes it harder for bullies to find victims. That's Franklin's real legacy, not just protecting lakefront property, but teaching people to protect themselves and their neighbors from those who exploit community life for personal power and profit.